My wife gave our daughter a terrible name without my consent. I legally changed it to something worse. My wife Ashley and I had agreed on the name Grace for our daughter ever since we found out we were having a girl. We'd picked it together after months of discussion, and both our families loved it. Grace was classic and beautiful and meant something to both of us, since it was my grandmother's middle name and Ashley's favorite virtue name. Everything was set until the day our daughter was born. I was in the cafeteria getting coffee after being up for 30 hours during Ashley's labor when she filled out the birth certificate. When I came back, the nurse congratulated me on baby Brinley McCartney. I thought I heard wrong and asked her to repeat it. She showed me the paperwork where Ashley had written Brinley McCartney with that exact spelling. I asked Ashley what happened to Grace, and she said she'd had an epiphany during labor that our daughter needed a unique name that stood out. She said Grace was boring and common, and our daughter deserved something special. I reminded her we'd agreed on Grace for 6 months and told everyone that was her name. Ashley said she was the one who carried the baby for 9 months and went through labor, so she got final say. The nurse said they could hold the paperwork for 24 hours if we needed to discuss it, but Ashley said it was already submitted electronically. That was a lie, but I didn't know until later. Our families were horrified when we announced Brinley McCartney. My mom asked how to spell it 3 times and still got it wrong. Ashley's dad said it sounded like a pharmaceutical drug. My sister asked if we were joking. Ashley got defensive and said everyone was jealous of our daughter's originality. She started calling the baby Bryn, but spelled it Bryn in texts, Bryn in cards, and Bryn on social media, never remembering her own daughter's spelling. The pediatrician's office misspelled it 4 different ways in their system. The insurance company said it exceeded their character limit. Daycare sent home forms with Brittany McCartney and couldn't understand why that was wrong. Ashley blamed everyone else for not appreciating creative names. When Brinley was 3 months old, I tried to get Ashley to agree to change it. She said I was trying to erase her birth experience and maternal bonding. She said the name came to her in a vision during contractions, and changing it would damage their spiritual connection. She actually used those words while our daughter's name got butchered by everyone who attempted it. The preschool years were hell. Brinley got called everything but her actual name. Teachers gave up and just called her B. Kids couldn't pronounce it. Parents thought we were pretentious idiots. Ashley insisted everyone was wrong and started correcting people aggressively. She'd interrupt story time to fix the teacher's pronunciation. She'd make other parents repeat it until they got it right. She made Brinley practice spelling it hundreds of times, even though she was only 4. When Brinley started kindergarten, she came home crying because kids said her name was stupid. Ashley told her they were jealous and bland while their daughter was extraordinary. Brinley asked if she could be called Grace instead, and Ashley grounded her for being ungrateful. That's when I started planning. I researched legal name changes for minors and found that one parent could petition if the other parent abandoned the child or was deemed unfit. Ashley wasn't unfit, but she was about to temporarily abandon Brinley. I convinced Ashley she needed a spa weekend for her mental health. I booked her a resort 2 hours away and said I'd handle everything at home. Ashley left Friday morning for her relaxation retreat. Friday afternoon, I filed emergency paperwork stating Ashley had left the state and abandoned her parental duties. Technically true since the resort was across state lines. The clerk who processed it saw Brinley McCartney on the form and immediately understood why a change was needed. She expedited it as a hardship case. By Monday, when Ashley returned, our daughter's legal name was Sizzlin' Morghaney Weatherbottom. I'd added the Weatherbottom as a third name for extra flair. Ashley found out when the school called asking about the updated documentation. She drove home screaming about what I'd done. Requested Reds is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. I heard the car screech into the driveway and knew she'd found out. The front door slammed open and Ashley stormed through, her face red and twisted. She threw her purse at the wall and started screaming about how I'd destroyed our daughter's identity. She demanded to know how I could do something so cruel and vindictive. I stayed calm on the couch, folding my hands in my lap. I told her I used exactly the same logic she did. The parent who handles the paperwork gets final say, and I handled this paperwork. Ashley's hands shook as she pointed at me. She called me a monster and said what I did was completely different. Her name choice came from a spiritual vision during labor, something sacred and meaningful. I leaned back and crossed my arms. I pointed out that Sizzlin' Morghaney came from my vision too. a vision of showing her exactly how it feels to have your partner betray an agreement. She started crying then, mascara running down her cheeks, but I felt nothing except satisfaction. The school bus pulled up outside around 3:30. I watched through the window as our daughter climbed down the steps, her shoulders hunched and her backpack dragging. She walked up the driveway slower than usual. When she came through the door, tears were already streaming down her face. Ashley rushed over and knelt down, asking what happened. Our daughter sobbed that her teacher couldn't figure out how to say her new name. The kids laughed at her even more than before. Someone called her Pizza Lynn, and everyone thought it was hilarious. Ashley whipped around and screamed at me that I'd made everything worse. She said I'd taken a bad situation and turned it into a nightmare. I felt something cold drop into my stomach. That was my first real stab of doubt about what I'd done. Our daughter ran to her room and slammed the door. I sat there staring at my hands while Ashley paced back and forth, muttering about what a terrible person I was. I got up and went to my office. I closed the door and pulled out my phone. I called the county clerk's office and waited through 4 minutes of hold music. When someone finally answered, I asked about reversing a name change. The woman on the phone explained that Ashley could file her own petition to change it again. There was a pause. Then she asked if this was about the Sizzlin case from Friday. I said yes. Her voice changed, got quieter and uncomfortable. She said she didn't realize this was a marital dispute when she expedited my paperwork. If she'd known, she would have required both parents' signatures. I thanked her and hung up. I sat at my desk feeling sick. A car pulled into the driveway around 6 that evening, then another car right behind it. I looked out and saw Ashley's parents getting out. Her father, Jason, looked furious. Her mother, Ramona, had her jaw set in a hard line. I opened the door before they could knock. Jason pushed past me without a word. He went straight to the living room where Ashley was sitting with our daughter. Ramona followed him but stopped to look at me. She wouldn't meet my eyes directly. She said what I did was psychological abuse of both Ashley and our daughter. I tried to explain, but she held up her hand. She said she didn't want to hear it. Jason came back from the living room and got in my face. He said Brinley McCartney might not have been perfect, but at least it was pronounceable. At least it came from love instead of spite. He said the monstrosity I created was worse than anything Ashley had done. I stood there taking it because I didn't know what else to do. They stayed for 2 hours, mostly talking to Ashley in the other room while I sat alone in the kitchen. The next morning, my own parents showed up. Ashley had called them the night before. My father, Christopher, asked to speak with me outside. We stood on the front porch in the cold morning air. He said he was ashamed of me. He said he understood being angry at Ashley, but using our daughter as a weapon was unforgivable. I tried to explain that I was making a point, but he cut me off. He said the point I made was that I cared more about revenge than my own child. My mother, Adriana, came out and put her hand on my shoulder. She was gentler, but her words cut deeper. She said I'd turned a bad situation into something truly terrible. She said I hurt my daughter just to hurt my wife, and that made me no better than Ashley. They didn't stay long after that. I watched them drive away and felt completely hollow inside. 2 days later, the school called. It was the kindergarten teacher, Wyatt Cannon. He said he needed to schedule an emergency meeting with both parents. He wouldn't tell me what it was about over the phone, but his voice was serious and concerned. He said our daughter was having emotional problems at the school. He didn't know what was happening at home, but the child was clearly suffering. He said he was required to document his concerns. We scheduled the meeting for the next afternoon. Ashley and I drove separately to the school. We sat in separate chairs outside the principal's office, not looking at each other. Principal Alice Herman called us in. She had papers spread across her desk and a grim expression. She explained that our daughter had told her teacher she wished she didn't have a name at all. She said whatever was going on between us needed to stop immediately. We were damaging our child's sense of identity and self-worth. I started to explain that I was making a point about Ashley's original betrayal. Alice held up her hand and cut me off. She said she didn't care about our marital problems. She cared that a 5-year-old was used as a weapon. She said if we couldn't resolve this right now, she'd have to file a report with Child Services. The words hit me like a punch. Ashley started crying. Alice handed her a tissue box and waited. She said we had 1 week to show progress or she'd make the call. We left the office in silence. Ashley drove away first. I sat in my car in the school parking lot for 20 minutes. I stared at the steering wheel trying to figure out how my justified revenge had turned into threats from child services. I wanted Ashley to understand how wrong she was. Instead, I'd proven I could be just as wrong, maybe worse. I finally started the car and drove home. The house was empty when I got there. I sat in my driveway with the engine off, watching the sun go down through my windshield. I sat there until the streetlights came on and the sky turned dark purple. Ashley's car pulled into the driveway around 7. She got out slowly and walked to my window. I rolled it down. She asked if I was coming inside. I nodded and got out. We walked into the house together without speaking. Our daughter was in the living room watching cartoons. She looked up when we came in, and her face got nervous. She asked if we were still fighting. Ashley sat down on the couch and pulled our daughter onto her lap. I sat in the chair across from them. Our daughter looked between us with big, worried eyes. She asked why we kept changing her name. She asked if it meant we didn't love her. Ashley started crying immediately. Her whole body shook, and she couldn't get words out. I watched her try to speak and fail 3 times. Our daughter started crying too because Ashley was crying. I moved to the couch and put my hand on our daughter's back. I told her we loved her so much. I told her we both made really bad choices. I told her we were going to fix it together. Our daughter asked how. I didn't have an answer ready. Ashley wiped her eyes and said we'd figure it out. Our daughter asked if her name would change again. I promised her it wouldn't keep changing. Ashley looked at me when I said that, but didn't argue. We put our daughter to bed early. She asked 3 more times if we loved her before she fell asleep. After she was out, Ashley and I went to the kitchen. I suggested we file right away to change the name to Grace like we originally agreed. Ashley sat down at the table and put her head in her hands. She said she couldn't just erase the name that came to her during the most important moment of her life. I reminded her that our daughter was suffering every single day. Ashley said she knew that, but Grace felt wrong now. She said too much had happened and we couldn't go backwards. I asked what she wanted then. She said she didn't know. We sat there in silence for 10 minutes. I suggested we pick something new together. Ashley shook her head. She said nothing would feel right after all this. I was getting mad again, but tried to stay calm. I asked if she was seriously going to let our daughter keep suffering because of her feelings. Ashley asked if I was seriously acting like I cared about our daughter after what I did. We were at the same place we'd been for weeks, both too stubborn to fully back down. The next morning, my mom called while I was making coffee. She didn't ask how I was doing or make small talk. She said she'd contacted a family law attorney named Evan Ballard, who handled parental disputes. She was paying for a consultation because we clearly couldn't figure this out ourselves. She said our daughter deserved better than parents who used her identity as a weapon. I tried to thank her, but she hung up before I could finish. Ashley came downstairs and asked who called. I told her about the attorney. She asked if I'd asked my mom to do that. I said no. Ashley poured herself coffee and said maybe it was good. Maybe someone else needed to tell us what to do since we couldn't agree on anything. Evan Ballard's office called that afternoon to schedule appointments. They wanted to meet with each of us separately first, and then together. Ashley went on Tuesday. I went on Wednesday. When I walked into his office on Thursday for the joint meeting, Ashley was already there sitting in a chair against the wall. Evan was behind his desk looking at papers. He was maybe 50 with gray hair and glasses. He didn't smile or shake our hands. He told us to sit. We sat in the 2 chairs facing his desk. Evan looked up from his papers and studied us for a long moment. He said we'd both committed what courts consider parental alienation through name manipulation. Ashley started to interrupt, but he held up his hand. He said any judge would see through both our actions. He said judges focused solely on what was best for the child. He said neither of us had considered that. Ashley's face went red. I felt my stomach drop. Evan kept going. He said he'd reviewed the original birth certificate filing. He'd reviewed my emergency petition. He'd talked to the school. He'd read the documentation from the pediatrician about our daughter's distress. Ashley said her choice was about maternal bonding and spiritual connection. She said it wasn't revenge. Evan looked at her over his glasses. He said she made the change without consent, after explicitly agreeing otherwise. He said that was a unilateral decision that violated her husband's parental rights. Ashley tried to argue, but Evan cut her off. He turned to me. I said mine was about proving a point. Evan said proving points at your daughter's expense was exactly what bad parents do. He said I'd used my child as a weapon in a marital dispute. He said that was textbook parental alienation. I wanted to defend myself but couldn't find the words. Evan explained that my emergency petition would likely get thrown out. He said I'd filed it with false information. Ashley didn't actually abandon the child. She went to a spa for a weekend. He said the court would see right through that. But he said that didn't mean they'd automatically restore Brinley McCartney either. He documented all the problems that name caused. Teachers couldn't say it. Kids made fun of it. Our daughter came home crying about it multiple times. He said the court might decide both names were harmful and pick something else entirely. Ashley and I looked at each other. Neither of us had thought about that possibility. He said we should agree on a compromise name before the court forced one on us. He suggested we actually ask our daughter what she wanted. Ashley said immediately that a 5-year-old couldn't make such an important decision. Evan said she was old enough to have an opinion we should respect. He said our daughter was the one who had to live with whatever name she had. He said her voice mattered more than ours at this point. Ashley looked upset, but didn't argue more. Evan scheduled another meeting for the following week. He said we needed to talk to our daughter before then. We drove home separately again. I got there first and waited in the living room. Ashley came in 15 minutes later. Our daughter was at a friend's house and wouldn't be back until dinner. We had a few hours. I asked Ashley if she was ready to do this. She asked if I was. I said I didn't think either of us was ready, but we had to do it anyway. At 6 o'clock, Ashley's friend dropped our daughter off. We thanked her and brought our daughter inside. Ashley suggested we talk in her room. Our daughter looked scared again. I promised her everything was okay. We all went upstairs and sat on her bed. I asked what name she liked best. Our daughter looked at Ashley first, and then at me. She said, Grace. Ashley opened her mouth to say something. Our daughter started crying before Ashley could speak. She said she just wanted a normal name that teachers could say. She said she wanted a name that kids didn't laugh at. She was sobbing now. Ashley pulled her close, but our daughter kept crying. Ashley got up suddenly and left the room. I heard her footsteps going down the hall to our bedroom. Our daughter asked where Mommy went. I said she needed a minute. I stayed with our daughter until she calmed down. I told her Grace was a beautiful name. I told her we'd make sure that's what her name would be. She asked if Mommy was mad at her. I promised her Mommy wasn't mad. I said Mommy just had some big feelings to work through. Our daughter hugged me and said she loved us both. I told her we loved her too. I found Ashley in our bedroom sitting on the floor against the bed. She was crying hard. I sat down next to her. She said the name Grace didn't honor her birth experience. She said she'd never forget that moment when Brinley came to her. I felt torn between wanting to comfort her and being angry she was still focused on herself. I understood she had real feelings about this, but our daughter had real suffering because of it. Ashley said she knew she was being selfish. She said she couldn't help how she felt. I put my arm around her shoulders. I said our daughter's happiness mattered more than our egos or experiences. I said we needed to put her first for once. Ashley turned to look at me. She asked if I could really say I put our daughter first. She said I changed her name to something even worse out of spite. She asked how that was putting our daughter first. I didn't have a good answer. She was right. I'd made everything worse trying to prove my point. We sat there on the floor together, not saying anything for a long time. The next 3 days passed in tense silence between Ashley and me. We moved around each other like strangers sharing a house. Our daughter went to the school each morning with her impossible name still attached to her. She came home quieter each day. The first afternoon, she told us some kids were calling her Pizza Lynn. She tried to laugh about it, but her eyes were wet. Ashley started to say something about kids being creative, but stopped when she saw our daughter's face. The second day, our daughter ate dinner without talking. She pushed her food around her plate and asked to be excused early. Ashley and I sat at the table after she left and didn't look at each other. The third day, Wyatt sent home a note in our daughter's backpack. I found it when I was checking her homework folder. The note explained that other children had started using Pizza Lynn as a regular nickname. Our daughter wasn't responding to it or correcting them. She was spending recess alone instead of playing with the other kids. Wyatt wrote that he was concerned about her becoming withdrawn and isolated. He asked us to contact him to discuss the situation. I showed the note to Ashley without saying anything. She read it twice and set it down on the kitchen counter. Her hands were shaking. She walked out of the room and I heard our bedroom door close. I stood in the kitchen holding the note and feeling the weight of what we'd both done to our daughter settling over me like something physical and heavy. Ashley came to me on the fourth morning. I was in the living room drinking coffee before work. She sat down on the couch across from me and folded her hands in her lap. She said she would agree to change the name to Grace. Her voice was quiet and flat. She said she had one condition. She wanted it legally documented that I admitted what I did was wrong and harmful. She wanted me to sign something official saying my actions hurt our daughter. I set down my coffee cup and looked at her. I said yes immediately. I told her I would sign anything she wanted if it meant our daughter could have a normal name and this nightmare could end. Ashley nodded and stood up. She said we should call Evan right away. I grabbed my phone and dialed his number before Ashley could change her mind. Evan answered on the third ring, and I explained what we wanted. He said he could draft the paperwork that afternoon. He asked us to come to his office at 3. I told him we'd be there. Evan's office was in a building downtown near the courthouse. Ashley and I drove separately and met in the parking lot. We walked in together without talking. The receptionist led us to a conference room where Evan was already waiting. He had papers spread across the table. He explained that he'd drafted a joint petition to change our daughter's name to Grace. The petition included a statement from both of us, acknowledging that our previous actions were not in her best interest. He said we both needed to sign it, and he would file it with the court within hours. Ashley read through the statement first. Her eyes moved slowly over the words. She signed her name at the bottom and pushed the papers toward me. I read the part where I admitted that changing my daughter's name to Sizzlin' Morgany Weatherbottom was harmful and done without proper consideration of her well-being. I signed my name next to Ashley's. Evan collected the papers and put them in a folder. He said he'd walk them over to the courthouse immediately. We thanked him and left. 2 days later, we got a letter from the court. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out. Evan called to explain that 3 weeks was actually fast, given how backed up family court usually was. He said we were lucky to get a date that soon. The same day, another letter arrived from the school. The principal wrote that they would informally use Grace in the classroom while the legal name change was pending. They wanted to make the transition easier for our daughter. I showed the letter to Ashley and she nodded. She didn't say anything, but I saw relief in her face, mixed with something that looked like pain. Our daughter came home from the school the next day, talking more than she had in over a week. Her teacher had started calling her Grace that morning. The other kids heard it, and some of them started using Grace too. She told us about a girl named Olivia, who said Grace was a pretty name. Our daughter was excited in a way I hadn't seen since before I changed her name. She talked through dinner about Olivia and how they were going to play together at recess tomorrow. Ashley watched her with a strange expression. She smiled when our daughter looked at her, but when our daughter looked away, Ashley's face went tight and sad. I could see her struggling with something internal. After our daughter went to bed, Ashley sat on the couch, staring at nothing. I asked if she was okay. She said she was fine, but her voice said otherwise. I sat down next to her but didn't push. She would talk when she was ready, or she wouldn't. Ashley's mother, Ramona, showed up 3 days later without calling first. She came in and hugged our daughter, and then asked to speak with Ashley alone. They went into the kitchen, and I heard their voices, but couldn't make out words. After 20 minutes, they came back out. Ramona looked at me and said she needed to talk to me too. Ashley took our daughter upstairs to play. Ramona sat down and told me she'd been thinking about everything that happened. She said she'd initially supported Ashley's choice of Brinley because she wanted to support her daughter. But after seeing what it did to her granddaughter, she realized she'd been wrong. She said maternal bonding didn't mean imposing your will on your child. She told me that the best mothers listen to their children's needs even when it conflicts with their own desires or experiences. She said Ashley was struggling to let go of her vision of what motherhood should be, but she needed to let go for her daughter's sake. Ramona looked tired when she said it. She hugged me before she left and told me to take care of her girls. My father, Christopher, called the next evening. He asked me to come over to their house. I drove over after dinner and found both my parents waiting in their living room. My dad asked to see the signed admission of wrongdoing from the court petition. I showed him a copy Evan had given me. My father read it carefully and then set it down. He said at least I could recognize and acknowledge my mistakes. His voice was less harsh than it had been the last time we talked. He said that was more than a lot of men could do. But then he warned me that Ashley and I needed serious marriage counseling. He said the trust between us was completely broken. He could see it in how we acted around each other. He said marriages didn't survive that kind of damage without real work. My mother put her hand on my shoulder and said they would help however they could. But we had to be willing to do the hard work ourselves. Ashley and I started seeing a therapist the following week. Her name was Dr. Stewart, and her office was in a medical building near the hospital. The first session, she had us sit across from each other and asked us to explain what brought us in. Ashley talked first about the name situation and how it escalated. Then I explained my side. Dr. Stewart listened without interrupting. When we finished, she said something that surprised both of us. She said we both had serious control issues. She said we'd used our daughter to fight battles that were really about our marriage. The name conflict was just a symptom of deeper problems. She said the real issues were about respect and communication and shared decision-making. She told us those problems would destroy our family if we didn't address them. Ashley and I looked at each other. Neither of us had thought about it that way. Dr. Stewart gave us homework for the week. She wanted us to practice making small decisions together and respecting each other's input. She said we'd work up to bigger issues once we learned the basics. The next therapy session was harder. Dr. Stewart asked Ashley to explain why she changed the name from Grace to Brinley without my consent. Ashley was quiet for a long time. Then she said she felt powerless during her pregnancy and labor. She said everyone was telling her what to do and how to feel. She said choosing the name was her way of taking back control over her own experience. She admitted it wasn't really about the name itself. It was about proving she had power over something. Dr. Stewart asked me why I changed the name to something worse. I struggled to put it into words. I finally said I felt betrayed and made to look like a fool. Ashley had humiliated me in front of our families, and I wanted her to feel as powerless as she'd made me feel. I said my revenge was about balancing the scales. Dr. Stewart wrote something in her notebook and looked up at us. She said we'd both prioritized our own feelings of power and control over our daughter's well-being. She said that pattern would destroy our family if we didn't change it fundamentally. She gave us exercises in collaborative decision-making. She said we needed to practice respecting each other's boundaries and actually listening instead of just waiting to respond. Ashley and I left that session feeling raw and exposed, but something had shifted between us. We'd both admitted the real reasons behind our actions. That honesty was painful, but it felt like maybe the start of something better. 3 weeks passed in a strange calm before the hearing date arrived. Ashley and I barely spoke except about basic logistics with our daughter. We moved around each other like strangers sharing a house. The morning of the court appearance, I put on my best suit, and Ashley wore a navy dress that made her look serious and responsible. Our daughter wore her favorite purple shirt with sparkles on it. Evan met us outside the courthouse and walked us through what would happen. He said the judge would likely ask our daughter questions directly, and we needed to let her answer honestly without coaching her. Ashley's hands shook as she held our daughter's hand walking up the courthouse steps. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, with wood paneling and fluorescent lights that buzzed. The judge was already seated when we entered. She was maybe 50, with gray hair pulled back and reading glasses perched on her nose. She looked up from the stack of papers in front of her, and her expression made my stomach drop. She looked tired and unimpressed, and like she'd seen every stupid thing parents could do to their kids. The bailiff called our case number, and Evan stood to present our joint petition. The judge held up one hand to stop him. She said she'd read all the documentation thoroughly and had some questions first. She looked directly at our daughter, who was sitting between Ashley and me in the front row. The judge asked her name in a gentle voice. Our daughter said her name was currently Sizzlin, but she didn't like it. The judge asked what name she wanted instead. Our daughter's voice was clear and steady when she said, Grace. She said she'd always wanted to be called Grace, like her great-grandmother. The judge nodded slowly and made a note on her papers. Then she looked at Ashley and me, and her expression hardened. She said she was approving the name change to Grace effective immediately. She signed the order right there and handed it to the clerk. But then she started talking, and her voice was cold. She said she'd been a family court judge for 20 years and seen parents do terrible things to children. She said using a child's name as a weapon in a marital dispute was one of the cruelest things she'd encountered. She looked at Ashley and said choosing a name without the father's consent was wrong. She looked at me and said retaliating with an even worse name was worse. She said we'd both put our egos and our anger ahead of our daughter's well-being. She said our daughter had suffered real harm from our actions. She said she was ordering us both to complete a parenting course focused on child-centered decision-making. She said we had 60 days to complete it and submit proof to the court. She said she'd be monitoring our compliance personally. Then she picked up another document from her stack. She said she was also invalidating my emergency petition. She said I'd made false statements to the court about Ashley abandoning our daughter. She said Ashley had been at a spa 2 hours away, not abandoning anyone. She said making false statements in court filings was serious and could result in contempt charges. She said she was letting it go this time only because we'd reached an agreement. But she warned that any future manipulation of legal processes would result in serious consequences, including possible jail time. She said she didn't want to see either of us in her courtroom again. She dismissed us with a wave of her hand. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Ashley was crying quietly beside me. Our daughter held both our hands and asked if everything was okay now. I told her yes, she was Grace now, and everything would be okay. But I didn't feel okay. We got what we originally wanted, but the judge was right about everything she said. I'd used my daughter to hurt Ashley. Ashley had used our daughter to prove some point about her maternal experience. We'd both been terrible parents. Ashley and I stood on the courthouse steps, while Evan went to get copies of the signed order. Neither of us knew what to say. We'd won, but it didn't feel like winning. Our daughter tugged on my hand and asked if we could get ice cream to celebrate her new name. Ashley and I looked at each other, and both nodded. We walked to the ice cream shop 2 blocks away in silence. Our daughter got chocolate chip and talked happily about how she couldn't wait to tell her teacher her real name. Ashley and I barely touched our ice cream. That night after our daughter went to bed, Ashley said she was sorry for everything. I said I was sorry too. We sat on opposite ends of the couch and didn't touch. The school updated their records within 5 days. The principal called to confirm the legal name change and said they'd make the transition as smooth as possible. Our daughter came home from the school that Friday bouncing with excitement. She said her teacher announced to the class that she had a new name now and everyone should call her Grace. She said she made 2 new friends at recess who wanted to play with her. She said one of them said Grace was a pretty name. The teacher sent home a note saying our daughter seemed much more confident and was participating in class discussions more. She said the name change appeared to have relieved significant anxiety. Over the next 2 weeks, I watched our daughter transform. She smiled more. She talked more at dinner. She volunteered to read aloud when we did bedtime stories. The constant tension in her shoulders disappeared. But Ashley struggled. I'd catch her starting to say Bryn and then stopping herself. Our daughter would gently correct her when she slipped. Ashley would apologize with tears in her eyes and force herself to say Grace. I could see it physically hurt her every time. One night after our daughter corrected her for the 3rd time that evening, Ashley locked herself in the bathroom and cried. I stood outside the door not knowing what to say. Our therapy sessions continued twice a week. In one session, Ashley finally broke down about the name situation. She said she felt like she was erasing the most important moment of her life. She said giving birth had transformed her, and choosing that name had been part of claiming her identity as a mother. The therapist listened, and then asked Ashley if her identity as a mother was more important than her daughter's identity as a person. Ashley was quiet for a long time. Then she said, no. The therapist helped her work through other ways to honor her birth experience. She suggested Ashley could write about it, create art about it, find a support group. She said Ashley needed to separate her own transformation from her daughter's identity. They weren't the same thing. In another session, the therapist focused on me. She asked why I'd felt the need to retaliate so dramatically. I explained that Ashley had humiliated me and broken our agreement and made me look like a fool. The therapist asked if making Ashley feel powerless had made me feel better. I admitted it had at first. Then it had made everything worse. She said I'd been trying to reassert dominance in the relationship instead of actually protecting my daughter. She said partnership meant neither person should feel powerless, but both people should feel respected. She said Ashley and I had both failed at that basic requirement. The parenting classes the judge ordered started 3 weeks after the hearing. They met Tuesday evenings at a community center. The first night, Ashley and I sat in folding chairs in a circle with 8 other parents. The instructor was a woman named Sandra, who'd been a social worker for 30 years. She didn't ask why we were court-ordered to be there. She just started teaching. The classes covered things like collaborative decision-making and putting children's needs first. Sandra taught us frameworks for discussing disagreements without fighting. She taught us how to check our egos at the door when making choices that affected our kids. She had us do role-playing exercises that felt stupid at first, but actually helped. We met other parents who'd made different mistakes, but similar ones in spirit. One couple had fought over their son's medical treatment until he'd ended up in the hospital. Another couple had used their daughter's college choice as a battleground. Everyone in that room had put their own needs ahead of their kids' well-being. It helped to know we weren't uniquely terrible. As the weeks passed, Ashley's relationship with our daughter improved. I'd watch them together and see Ashley making a conscious effort to just let Grace be a kid. She stopped trying to make every moment meaningful or special. She stopped trying to prove something through her parenting. Grace started coming to Ashley more often for comfort when she was upset. They'd cuddle on the couch watching cartoons, and Ashley would stroke her hair. Grace started asking Ashley to help with homework and read bedtime stories. The trust that had been damaged was slowly rebuilding. I could see the relief on Ashley's face every time Grace chose to come to her instead of me. I started making more effort to include Grace in decisions around the house. I'd ask her what she wanted for dinner instead of just making something. I'd let her pick which movie we watched on Friday nights. Small things that showed her opinion mattered. She seemed surprised at first, like she wasn't used to being asked. One evening while we were reading together before bed, she got quiet and looked up at me. She said she'd been scared when her name kept changing. She said she didn't know who she was supposed to be. I felt my chest get tight hearing her say that. I told her I was sorry for putting her through all of it. I said I'd made bad choices because I was angry at her mom, but that wasn't her fault. She hugged me and said it was okay, because her name was Grace now, and she liked being Grace. I held her close and promised myself I'd never use her to hurt Ashley again. 3 months after the courthouse hearing, Grace came running in from the bus stop waving a piece of construction paper. She'd done a family art project at the school where she drew stick figures of all of us. There was me with brown hair and glasses. There was Ashley with long yellow hair. There was Grace herself in the middle holding both our hands. Under each person, she'd written our names in her careful kindergarten handwriting with some letters backwards. Under my stick figure, it said Dad. Under Ashley's, it said Mom. Under her own, it said Grace, with the G written extra big. Ashley and I both stood there in the kitchen looking at that drawing, and we both started crying at the same time. Grace looked confused and asked if we didn't like her picture. Ashley picked her up and said we loved it. We loved it so much. I took the picture and put it on the refrigerator with a magnet. Every time I walked past it that week, I stopped to look at that name written in wobbly letters. Grace. Just Grace. Ashley and I kept going to therapy every week. The therapist gave us exercises to practice at home. We had to discuss small decisions together before making them, even stupid things like what color towels to buy or where to go for lunch. It felt awkward at first, checking in with each other about everything, but slowly, it started feeling more natural. We got better at actually listening instead of just waiting for our turn to talk. We learned to say things like, I hear what you're saying, and help me understand your perspective. It sounds corny, but it actually helped. We weren't back to where we were before Brinley happened. That version of us was gone, but we were building something new that felt more honest. We both knew what the other person was capable of now. There was no pretending we were perfect partners who always agreed. We were two people who'd hurt each other badly and were trying to do better. Family dinners with our parents got easier over time. My mom and dad started coming over again for Sunday meals. Ashley's parents joined us too. The first few dinners were tense with lots of careful conversation about safe topics like the weather and Grace's school. But gradually, everyone relaxed as they saw us actually working on our problems. My dad pulled me aside one Sunday and said he could see the effort we were putting in. He said he was proud of us for not giving up. Ashley's mom told Ashley the same thing, but nobody let us forget what happened either. My sister still made jokes about pharmaceutical names. Jason would randomly say, "Weather bottom," and shake his head. They'd turned the whole disaster into a family cautionary tale. Whenever someone was about to make a unilateral decision about anything, someone else would say, "Remember the name situation," and everyone would laugh. It was embarrassing, but probably what we deserved. Parent-teacher conferences happened in November. Ashley and I sat together in the tiny kindergarten chairs while Wyatt stood by his desk with Grace's folder. He said she'd made remarkable progress both in her schoolwork and with making friends. He said she was participating more in class and seemed much happier. He showed us her reading scores, which had jumped up significantly. He said she was one of the top readers in the class now. He was diplomatic and never mentioned the earlier problems with her name, or the crying, or the isolation. But we could see the relief on his face that the situation had resolved. He probably thought we were the worst parents he'd dealt with in his career. After the conference, we thanked him for his patience, and he just nodded and said, "Grace was a wonderful kid." Walking out to the parking lot, Ashley grabbed my hand and squeezed it. We both knew how close we'd come to really damaging our daughter. A few weeks later, Ashley showed me something she'd been writing. It was a letter to Grace that she planned to save and give her when she was older, maybe when she was a teenager or in college. The letter explained the whole Brinley situation from Ashley's perspective. She wrote about feeling powerless during pregnancy and labor. She wrote about wanting to make one decision that was entirely hers. She wrote about the vision she'd had during contractions and how real it felt at the time. But then she apologized for not thinking about what Grace would have to live with. She apologized for prioritizing her own feelings over Grace's actual life. She apologized for the years of struggle and embarrassment. The letter was honest and painful to read. Ashley cried while I read it. When I finished, I told her it was good that she'd written it down. I told her it helped me understand her thinking better, even though I still thought she'd been wrong. She said she knew she'd been wrong now. She said she just needed Grace to know someday that it came from a real place, not from cruelty. That conversation made me realize I needed to write my own letter. I spent a week working on it at night after everyone went to bed. I wrote to Grace about the sizzling revenge and why I'd done it. I explained how angry and humiliated I'd felt when Ashley changed her name without asking me. I explained how I'd wanted Ashley to feel that same powerlessness. But then I wrote about what I'd learned since then. I wrote about anger and control and how you can hurt people you love when you're trying to prove a point. I wrote about using her as a weapon and how wrong that was. I wrote about all the ways I'd failed her as a father during those months. I apologized for adding to her pain instead of protecting her from it. Reading these letters to each other in therapy became a turning point. Our therapist had us sit facing each other and read them out loud. Ashley cried through mine. I cried through hers. When we finished, the therapist said this was the first time we'd both fully acknowledged the damage we'd caused. She said that acknowledgement was necessary before we could really move forward. The therapist said we'd made significant progress over the past few months. She said the work we'd done on communication and collaborative decision-making was impressive. But then she warned us that the patterns we'd fallen into could come back under stress. She said unilateral decisions, using Grace as a weapon, prioritizing our egos over our family. These were patterns that felt natural to us now. She said we'd need to actively fight against them, especially when things got hard. She recommended we keep coming to therapy even after we felt fixed. She said maintenance was just as important as repair. Ashley and I agreed immediately. We both knew how close we'd come to destroying everything. We weren't going to risk falling back into old habits just because things felt better now. That evening at home, Ashley and I sat at the kitchen table and came up with a new family rule. We wrote it down on a piece of paper in big letters. Any major decision affecting Grace requires both parents to agree. If we can't agree, we table it until we find a compromise. No exceptions. No emergency situations that justify going around the other person. No visions or spiritual connections that override partnership. We both signed it like a contract. Then we stuck it on the refrigerator right next to Grace's family drawing. Every time we went into the kitchen, we'd see it there. A constant reminder of what we'd promised each other and our daughter. 4 months after the courthouse hearing, Grace came running in from playing outside. Her friend from down the street took ballet classes, and Grace wanted to know if she could take them too. She was bouncing with excitement, already describing the pink leotard she wanted. Ashley and I looked at each other across the living room. I could see we were both thinking the same thing. This was exactly the kind of moment where we used to make unilateral decisions. Ashley would have signed her up immediately without asking me, or I would have said no just to assert control. But instead, we told Grace to give us a few minutes to discuss it. We went into the kitchen together and talked through the logistics, the cost, the schedule, whether we could make it work with everything else. We both shared our thoughts. We both listened. Then we went back to Grace together and told her yes, ballet sounded great. We'd look into classes this week. Grace squealed and hugged us both. It was such a small moment, but it felt huge. We'd actually done it right. The parenting class graduation ceremony took place in a bland community center room with folding chairs and a table of cookies that looked homemade but tasted store-bought. Ashley and I sat through presentations from other parents about their growth journeys, each one more awkward than the last. A dad talked about learning to validate his teenage daughter's feelings instead of dismissing them. A mom cried while describing how she'd stopped using guilt as a parenting tool. When our turn came, the instructor called us up together and handed us matching certificates printed on heavy cream-colored paper. Ashley held hers carefully like it actually meant something. I folded mine in half to fit in my jacket pocket. The instructor congratulated us on completing the program and said she'd seen real change in how we communicated during group sessions. Ashley thanked her genuinely, while I nodded and tried to look appropriately grateful. Driving home separately, I thought about how silly the whole ceremony felt, but also how it marked something real. We'd shown up every week for 8 weeks and actually done the work instead of just going through the motions. 2 days later, an envelope arrived from the family court with the judge's letterhead. I opened it standing in the kitchen while Ashley watched from the doorway. The letter was brief, just 3 sentences acknowledging our completion of the required parenting classes and noting that we'd satisfied the court's conditions. The final sentence said the judge hoped our family would continue to thrive and wished us well. Ashley asked to read it, and I handed it over. She read it twice, then carefully folded it and put it back in the envelope. Grace's 6th birthday party happened on a Saturday afternoon in our backyard with balloons tied to the fence and a princess cake from the bakery she'd picked out herself. Both sets of grandparents arrived within minutes of each other, my parents bringing a wrapped present the size of a small refrigerator, and Ashley's parents carrying a gift bag stuffed with tissue paper. My mom hugged Grace and asked what the birthday girl wanted to do first. Ashley's dad, Jason, helped me set up the folding tables, while Ramona arranged the paper plates and napkins in neat stacks. My sister showed up with her kids, and suddenly the yard filled with children running and screaming in that specific pitch that makes adults wince. Nobody mentioned Brinley or Sizzlin or the months of chaos that had preceded this moment. My dad asked Grace about first grade starting in the fall, and she told him about her new backpack with sparkles. Ramona complimented the cake and asked Ashley where she'd ordered it from. Jason talked to my mom about their garden and whether the tomatoes would come in early this year. The whole afternoon unfolded like a normal family birthday party, relaxed and easy without any pointed comments or careful topic avoidance. Grace opened presents and squealed over each one, hugging grandparents and thanking them without any prompting from us. We sang happy birthday while she made a wish and blew out 6 candles in one breath. Ashley and I stood next to each other taking photos, and our hands brushed together when we both reached for the cake knife. She smiled at me, and I smiled back, and it felt completely natural. That evening, after everyone left and Grace was in bed, Ashley found me in the living room putting away the leftover decorations. She sat down on the couch and said she'd been thinking about something. I waited for her to continue, folding a tablecloth into increasingly messy squares. She said she wanted us to have another child. The words came out quickly, like she'd been practicing them. She said she wanted a chance to do it right this time, with collaboration and respect from the very beginning. I stopped folding and looked at her. My first reaction was panic, because the last pregnancy had nearly destroyed our marriage and resulted in years of name warfare. But I could see she was serious and had thought about this carefully. I said I was hesitant given everything we'd been through. She nodded and said she understood completely, that she'd be hesitant too if she were me. Then she said we should discuss it in therapy first, before making any decisions. I agreed immediately because that felt like exactly the right approach. We sat quietly for a minute, and then Ashley said she knew it was a lot to think about, and we didn't need to decide anything tonight. I thanked her for bringing it up as a discussion instead of a decision, and she said that was the whole point of everything we'd learned. The following week in therapy, we brought up Ashley's suggestion about having another baby. Our therapist listened carefully while we explained our different reactions and concerns. She asked what had prompted Ashley to think about this now. Ashley said watching Grace thrive, as Grace had made her realize how much she'd let her own needs override her daughter's well-being before. She said she wanted another chance to be a better mother from the start. The therapist asked what my concerns were, and I said honestly that I was scared we'd fall back into old patterns under the stress of pregnancy and a newborn. The therapist nodded and said both perspectives made complete sense. She pulled out a notepad and started making a list of the growth we'd made over the past months. Better communication, collaborative decision-making, putting Grace's needs first, recognizing our control issues, respecting each other's boundaries. Then she made another list of work still ahead. Maintaining these patterns under stress, handling disagreements without power struggles, staying in therapy long-term, continuing to prioritize our daughter. She said if we did decide to have another baby, we needed to agree on the name before conception to avoid repeating our pattern. Ashley and I looked at each other and both nodded. The therapist said she wasn't telling us whether to have another child or not, but we needed to be realistic about the challenges and commit to handling them differently than last time. Over the next few weeks, Ashley and I spent several evenings at the kitchen table talking about potential names for a hypothetical future baby. The conversations felt completely different from before. Ashley suggested names and asked what I thought instead of announcing decisions. I shared my preferences and listened when she explained why certain names appealed to her. We talked about family names and meanings and how names sounded with our last name. Neither of us pushed or dismissed the other's ideas. We made lists and crossed things off and added new options. Ashley liked Olivia and I thought it was pretty, but worried about popularity. I suggested Thomas and Ashley said it reminded her of a childhood bully, but she appreciated me sharing it. We laughed about some of the terrible celebrity baby names we'd seen online. We agreed that uniqueness wasn't worth making a child's life harder. The whole process felt playful and collaborative instead of combative. One night, Ashley said she felt heard in a way she hadn't during her pregnancy with Grace, that she'd felt alone and powerless then, and compensated by grabbing control where she could. I said I felt respected instead of steamrolled, that I'd felt betrayed and humiliated before and lashed out to regain power. We both acknowledged how badly we'd handled things and how much better this felt. After a month of these conversations, we decided we weren't quite ready for another child yet. The decision came easily during one of our name discussions, when we both realized we were still practicing collaborative decision-making rather than genuinely planning a pregnancy. Ashley said she needed more time to be confident in our new patterns before adding a baby to the mix. I agreed completely and said I wanted to be sure we could handle normal life stress before taking on pregnancy and newborn stress. But the conversations had been valuable practice in exactly the skills we'd been learning. We'd listened to each other, found common ground, respected boundaries, and made a joint decision without either of us feeling overruled or dismissed. Our therapist said this was exactly the kind of work that would serve us well, whether we eventually had another child or not. She said collaborative decision-making was a skill that required constant practice, and we'd use these conversations to strengthen that skill. Grace started first grade in September at the same elementary school where she'd attended kindergarten. I filled out the enrollment paperwork with her legal name, Grace, written clearly in every blank. The school had no record anywhere of Brinley McCartney or Sizzlin Morghaney. Her new teacher had no idea about the chaos that had preceded this fresh start. At the first parent-teacher conference in October, the teacher told us Grace was confident and well-adjusted, participating eagerly in class and making friends easily. She said Grace seemed comfortable with herself and secure in her identity, showing none of the anxiety or withdrawal that sometimes appeared in first graders. Ashley and I thanked her and didn't mention that a year ago, our daughter had been falling apart under the weight of an impossible name. Walking to our car after the conference, Ashley said she was grateful Grace would never remember the worst of what we'd put her through. I said I was grateful too, but also thought we shouldn't forget it ourselves, that remembering our mistakes would help us avoid repeating them. Ashley and I celebrated our anniversary in November with a quiet dinner at home after Grace went to bed. We ordered takeout from the restaurant where we'd had our first date and ate at the kitchen table with candles Ashley found in the back of a drawer. We talked about how close we'd come to destroying our marriage over names and control and ego. Ashley said there were months when she genuinely thought we might not make it, when the anger and betrayal felt too big to overcome. I admitted I'd felt the same way, that I'd wondered if we'd damaged things beyond repair. But we'd both chosen to do the hard work instead of giving up or staying stuck in our patterns. We renewed our commitment to each other, and to Grace, right there at the kitchen table with cold Chinese food and half-melted candles. We promised to keep going to therapy and working on communication and putting our family before our individual needs to be right or in control. Ashley reached across the table and took my hand and said she was proud of us for getting here. I squeezed her hand back and said I was proud of us too. A few days later, I got an email from Evan Ballard asking how our family was doing. He said he liked to check in with former clients when their cases had been particularly contentious to see if the resolutions held up. I wrote back immediately with genuine gratitude for his blunt honesty during our consultation. I told him we'd completed the parenting classes, rebuilt our marriage through therapy, and our daughter was thriving with her name Grace. I said his refusal to take sides and his insistence that we'd both been wrong had forced us to face what we were really doing to our daughter. Evan replied within an hour, saying he was glad we'd taken it seriously, because many couples in similar situations didn't. He said too often parents got stuck defending their positions and forgot that family court existed to protect children, not validate adult egos. He said he was happy to hear Grace was doing well and wished our family continued success. One afternoon in early December, Grace came home from the school and asked why her name used to be different. She'd found an old envelope in the recycling bin addressed to Brinley and wanted to know who that was. Ashley and I looked at each other, and I could see we were both thinking the same thing. We'd known this conversation would come eventually. We sat down with Grace at the kitchen table, and I started by saying that when she was born, her mom and I had made some mistakes about her name. Ashley took over and explained in simple terms that we'd both chosen names without talking to each other first, and that had caused problems. I said we'd learned that parents need to work together and listen to each other, and most importantly, listen to their kids. Grace asked if Brinley was her real name before, and Ashley said yes, for a little while, but now her real name was Grace, and that's what it would stay. Grace thought about this for a minute, then said, "Everyone makes mistakes, and it was okay, because we'd fixed it." Ashley and I both felt our throats tighten at how easily she was accepted our explanation. Grace asked if she could go play now, and we said yes. She ran off to her room, leaving us sitting at the table feeling both reassured and humbled by her simple forgiveness. A few weeks later, I was in the produce section at the grocery store picking through apples when I heard someone say my name. I turned around and saw the county clerk who'd processed my emergency name change paperwork standing there with her cart. She looked uncomfortable and started apologizing right away, saying she should have asked more questions before expediting the filing. She said she'd felt terrible ever since she found out what had really happened, that she'd been manipulated into helping me hurt my own daughter. I stopped her and said it wasn't her fault at all. I told her I'd deliberately misled her about the situation and taken advantage of the system, and I was the one who owed her an apology. She seemed surprised but relieved, and we talked for a few more minutes about how Grace was doing now. I showed her a recent photo on my phone of Grace smiling at her ballet recital, and the clerk said she was glad everything worked out. After we said goodbye, I stood there holding my bag of apples, feeling grateful that even strangers who'd been caught up in my mess were willing to forgive. That same week, Ashley surprised me by asking if I could help her with something in the living room. She'd taken the picture Grace drew of our family at the school and bought a nice frame for it. We hung it together on the wall near the couch where we'd see it every day. Ashley said she wanted it there as a reminder of what actually mattered, not our egos or our need to be right, but Grace and our family. Over the following weeks, whenever Ashley or I started falling into our old patterns of arguing or trying to control things, one of us would point at that picture, and we'd both stop and reset. It became our signal to each other that we were slipping back into bad habits, and seeing Grace's careful drawing of the three of us holding hands always brought us back to what we were supposed to be protecting. In February, our couples therapist told us she thought we could move to monthly sessions instead of weekly ones. Ashley and I looked at each other with genuine surprise, because it felt like a huge milestone we hadn't seen coming. The therapist said we'd made real progress in communication and collaborative decision-making, and she was proud of the work we'd done. She reminded us that maintaining a healthy relationship required ongoing effort, though, not just crisis intervention when things got bad. She said couples who stopped working on their relationship after therapy often slid back into old patterns within a year or two. Ashley and I both committed right there to continuing the work, even after therapy ended completely, to keep checking in with each other and prioritizing our family over our individual needs to be right. A full year after the courthouse hearing where Grace officially became Grace, our family was in a genuinely good place. Not perfect, because we still had disagreements and tough days, but we were honest with each other now and respectful in ways we'd never been before. Grace was thriving as Grace, making friends easily and loving first grade without any anxiety about her name. Ashley and I had rebuilt trust through consistent effort and thousands of small choices to communicate instead of control. We'd learned the hard way that our daughter's well-being had to come before our egos every single time, no exceptions. The scars from our name war were still there, and probably always would be, but they'd become reminders of hard lessons we'd actually learned, rather than open wounds that kept hurting us. We were better parents and better partners because we'd faced what we'd done to Grace and chosen to change instead of staying stuck in our patterns of blame and revenge.